Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me. Again, today we are talking about Psalm 37. Psalm 37, I think this is maybe I don't know if it's the longest psalm we've done so far. It has 40 verses, though, but all the verses are relatively short, so it doesn't actually take that long to read. Hopefully, you've already read it. Let's talk about it now and break it down. Psalm 37, the author is David, and we do have some New Testament references. Now, I don't know if these are direct references exactly, but Jesus in Matthew 5:5, when he's giving the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount, he makes a very similar statement to what appears in Psalm 37, verse 11, that the meek will inherit the earth. So now we go down to our themes. I've got 4 here. Number 1, wicked people seem to flourish on the earth. Right? That seems to be true, and that was David's observation as well. Number 2, don't fret yourself, or godly people shouldn't fret themselves over the seeming success of the wicked. Number 3, God will bring all the works of these wicked people into judgment. And number 4, the Lord will exalt the humble, the meek, and the godly man. Speaking of fretting, that takes us to our definition section, and this is a word that David uses in the psalm that maybe some are not as familiar with, and that's the word to fret. What does it mean to fret? David says not to do it. It's to be in a constant state of anxiety or frustration over something or someone. In this case, he says don't fret over those wicked people who seem to be doing really well and being so successful. So let's talk about that now in our outline section. That word does appear in our section heading. There are 40 verses, but I've got them all under one heading. Don't fret over evildoers, but delight yourself in the Lord. That's David's advice to, no doubt, himself and also to the people who are reading this psalm. So David didn't want himself or other people to be fooled by the facade of the wicked lifestyle, as is very much still the case today. Many evildoers in David's time appeared to be living very glamorously and very successful lives, at least by the world's standards. At the same time, these people were taking advantage of the poor and they were mistreating God's servants. And David admitted that he had seen wicked people doing really well and succeeding in their pursuits as they went about life here on the earth. He compared them to a flourishing green tree in verse 35. Now, David acknowledged, and I think we would certainly affirm today, us believers would affirm, that there is a temptation to be envious of these people and to want what they have and wonder why God hasn't given us as much as he's given to them. Now, although David acknowledges the temptation in verse 1, he spends the majority of Psalm 37 making the case that the success of the wicked is just temporary, right? Or it's just a facade. It's something that's going to vanish very quickly. And in contrast to that, a life lived in God's will is vastly superior to whatever you see these wicked people having. He told God's people not to fret over these evildoers and not to allow their hearts to be filled up with anger towards them or jealousy. And part of the reason for this is he says all their success or seeming success is going to fade away. He compares it to grass that quickly withers. In verse 20, quote, "But the wicked will perish. The enemies of the Lord are like the glory of the pastures. They vanish. Like smoke, they vanish away." God was going to deal with these people and bring their terrible actions back on their heads, according to verse 4. So instead of envying these people, David advised, quote, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart," verse 4. He wrote in verse 17, "Blessed is the little that the righteous has than the abundance of many wicked." God promises that the righteous man, the godly man, the meek man is going to be the one who is most blessed when all is said and done. Quote, "Mark the blameless and behold the upright, for there is a future for the man of peace." David says, put a mark on the meek men of the world, the humble men, the godly men of the world. There's a future attached to them, right? God's going to ensure that. The wicked men, there's no future for them. But a godly man has a glorious future awaiting him. A wicked man, in contrast, has nothing to look forward to. So being a child of God, a follower of God, is very much a long game. It's a trust that whatever God has in store for us is way, way better than the vanishing pleasures of this world. Now our application, I think this is one that many, many people can relate to, including myself. My wife and I were having a conversation about this just yesterday. It's understandable for Christians to ask why godless and earthly-minded people are more materially blessed than them. Why is it that God allows people who have never worshiped Him a day in their life to have so much? I think as humans, we're conditioned to think that money is always a good thing. However, that's not necessarily true when you're thinking biblically. One important thing that we need to keep in mind is that money is not always a blessing. Money destroys people. The Bible talks about it it tells God's followers to be very cautious of money. It says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil in 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10. There are temptations that are associated with money that a person without money is never going to have to face. I think when all is said and done here, when the saved get to heaven, imagine that many of them will look back at their time on earth and thank God for not giving them extraordinary wealth because they didn't have to face those temptations. Or maybe they'll look back in more wisdom, knowing I wouldn't have been able to handle it, and it would have driven me away from God. It would have driven me to think that I was self-sufficient. I was doing this on my own. So I think many people will look at God and be like, thank you for not giving me that, because it would have been a mess. My life may have turned out differently. I think we all think that we're the exception. When the Bible gives us the warning about money, it says that it's hard for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God. We say, well, but I would be the exception. One thing I learned as I get older is that most of the time, I'm not the exception to the rule. I am the rule. So I think for many of us, although we think, I'd be great with money, I'd give it all away to people and whatnot, is that be careful before you think you're the exception to that rule. And to that verse that I just mentioned, biblically speaking, it's very hard to serve God and to be wealthy at the same time. This isn't, my opinion, this is Jesus's words. He says in Matthew 19, verse 24, "Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter into the kingdom of God." God limiting our wealth can be rightly viewed as a protection over our lives. Don't despise God's protection by envying the wealth of the wicked.